He left everything, every last dollar, to a woman none of us have ever met. The courtroom did not erupt. It went silent. The kind of silence that falls when something so unexpected happens that the brain needs a full second to process whether it just heard correctly. Margaret Holloway, 71 years old, sitting in the front row of a packed New York probate courtroom, gripped her daughter's arm so hard the knuckles went white. Raymond Holloway had been worth $340 million. He had built his fortune over 40 years in commercial real estate, patient, disciplined, methodical. He had been married to Margaret for 43 of those years. They had 3 children, 6 grandchildren, a family that had gathered at his bedside in his final weeks and believed, without any reason to doubt it, that they would be taken care of. Raymond had changed his will the night before he died. Everything, the properties, the accounts, the trusts, every single asset, had been redirected to a 29-year-old woman named Callie Reyes, a woman who lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Phoenix, Arizona, a woman who had never once appeared at a Holloway family dinner, birthday, holiday, or funeral. A woman the family had never heard of until the will was read. Margaret looked across the courtroom. Callie Reyes sat on the opposite side, hands folded, eyes forward. Young, quiet, saying nothing. And in that silence, the question that would define the next 6 months hung in the air like smoke. Who was she? Subscribe and stay with us, because the answer is going to change everything you think you know about this family. Raymond Holloway had been diagnosed with a terminal heart condition 14 months before he died. His doctors gave him a year. He lasted 13 months, which his family later described as very Raymond. He did not waste a single day of it. He organized his affairs, met with his attorneys, updated his estate documents, and spent as much time as possible with his grandchildren. He was, by every account of those who visited him in that final year, at peace. What no one knew was that during those 14 months, Raymond had also been making phone calls, quiet ones, to a private investigator in Phoenix named Dennis Hale, to an attorney he had never used before, a woman named Susan Park who specialized in estate law and had no prior relationship with the Holloway family, and eventually to Callie Reyes herself. Those calls lasted weeks before Callie agreed to meet him. When she finally did, flying to New York on a ticket Raymond had paid for, she sat across from a dying old man in a hospital bed and listened to him explain something that she had spent her entire life not knowing, something her mother had kept from her, something Raymond had kept from everyone. Callie Reyes was his daughter. Raymond had met Callie's mother, Eleanor Reyes, 30 years earlier at a real estate conference in Chicago. Eleanor was 24, working as a hotel events coordinator. Raymond was 41, married and successful enough to believe that what happened in Chicago could stay there. The relationship lasted 8 months. When Elena discovered she was pregnant, she told Raymond. His response was not cruelty. He did not deny it. He did not threaten her. He simply told her, quietly and with what she would later describe as genuine regret, that he could not leave his family. He offered financial support. Elena refused it. She moved back to Phoenix, raised Callie alone, and told her daughter only that her father was someone who could not be part of their lives. She never told Callie his name. Raymond had known about Callie's existence for 30 years. He had kept track of her, not intrusively, not obsessively, but enough to know she was alive and well and had built a quiet, decent life working as a school librarian. He had carried the weight of that knowledge every single day. And when the doctors told him he was dying, he decided he could not leave the world without correcting the one thing he had never made right. He hired Dennis Hale to make contact. He had Susan Park draft a new will. And on the night before he died, with Susan present as witness, he signed it. The Holloway family learned of its existence 4 days after the funeral, when the family's longtime estate attorney, a man named George Pruitt, called Margaret and told her there was something she needed to hear in person. Margaret's eldest son, Daniel, hired a litigation attorney before the week was out. His sister Claire hired her own. Their younger brother, Thomas, initially said he wanted to wait and understand the situation before taking any legal action, a position he held for approximately 72 hours before joining the lawsuit. The family's legal theory was straightforward. Raymond had been dying, medicated, and emotionally vulnerable in his final days. He had been manipulated by an opportunistic stranger who had inserted herself into his life at the moment he was least equipped to make sound decisions. The will was the product of undue influence. It should be invalidated. The prior will, the one that left everything to Margaret and the children, should be reinstated. It was a clean argument. A sympathetic argument. And it had one significant problem. Subscribe to Sweet Justice right now, because the evidence the other side was about to present is the part of this case that the family never saw coming. Callie Reyes had not inserted herself into Raymond's life. She had not contacted him. She had not known who he was. She had been found by a private investigator working on Raymond's behalf, approached through a letter, and had initially refused to respond at all. The paper trail of every contact between Raymond and Callie, every call, every letter, every meeting, had been carefully documented by Susan Park from the very beginning. Raymond had anticipated a challenge. He had built his case before. He died. The probate trial opened on a Monday morning in March, 6 months after Raymond's death. Judge Carol Simmons presided, a 20-year veteran of the New York Surrogates Court who had seen every variety of inheritance dispute the city could produce and was not easily surprised by any of them. The Holloway family's attorney, a Charpentier litigator named Franklin Bowes, opened with a portrait of Raymond in his final months, weakened, heavily medicated, grieving the life he was losing, and therefore susceptible to the influence of a young woman who had appeared at precisely the right moment of vulnerability. He told the jury that Callie Reyes had known exactly what she was doing, that the relationship between them had been cultivated with a single purpose, that the will was not the final wish of a sound mind, but the product of manipulation. It was a polished opening. Margaret Holloway wept quietly in the front row throughout it. Several jurors looked at her. Susan Park's opening for Callie's side was shorter and less dramatic. She said the evidence would show that Raymond Holloway had been a man of extraordinary deliberation who had spent 14 months making a decision he had been postponing for 30 years. She said the jury would hear from the private investigator Raymond had hired, the doctors who had assessed his mental capacity, and the witnesses to the will signing itself. She said the evidence would show that Callie Reyes had not pursued Raymond Holloway. Raymond Holloway had pursued her. Then she said one sentence that changed the temperature of the room. And at the conclusion of this trial, the evidence will show that Callie Reyes is Raymond Holloway's biological daughter, a fact that DNA testing, conducted after his death at the request of this court, has confirmed beyond any scientific doubt. The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds. Margaret Holloway turned and looked at Callie for the first time since the trial had begun. Callie did not look back. Franklin Bowes had known the DNA results were coming. He had prepared for them. But knowing something is coming and experiencing it in a courtroom in front of a jury are two very different things, and the expression on his face in that moment was one that experienced trial observers would later describe as controlled damage. The first witness Susan called was Dennis Hale, the private investigator. He was 60, unhurried, and precise in the way that people who have spent decades finding things that were not meant to be found tend to be precise. He walked the court through Raymond's initial contact with him, a phone call in which Raymond had provided Elena Reyes's name, a general timeline, and a location. He described the search process. He described the moment he confirmed Callie's identity and reported back to Raymond. He described Raymond's response. A long silence on the phone, followed by the words, "I need you to find a way to reach her. That doesn't frighten her." Franklin's cross-examination focused on the idea that Dennis had been paid by Raymond, that he was therefore a partial witness whose account served the interests of his employer. Dennis acknowledged the payment. He said it did not change what had happened. The second witness was Dr. Patricia Lowe, the neurologist who had assessed Raymond's cognitive capacity at his own request, 4 weeks before the will was signed. Raymond had anticipated the challenge so precisely that he had arranged a formal Capacity evaluation. Sitting with Dr. Lowe for 3 hours, answering questions, completing assessments, and signing a document authorizing her to testify about her findings in any subsequent legal proceeding. Dr. Lowe told the court that Raymond Holloway had been, at the time of the assessment, in full possession of his cognitive faculties, that he had understood the nature of his assets, the identity of his potential heirs, and the consequences of the changes he intended to make, that he had expressed clearly and consistently his reasons for those changes, and that, in her professional opinion, he had been fully competent to make them. Franklin challenged the assessment aggressively. He suggested that cognitive capacity tests could not account for emotional manipulation, that a man could pass every clinical measure and still be vulnerable to the influence of someone skilled at exploiting grief. Dr. Lowe said that was theoretically true. She said that in Raymond's case, she had specifically explored the nature of his relationship with Callie Reyes during the assessment, and that his account of it had been consistent, detailed, and entirely free of the kind of idealization or dependency that typically indicated undue influence. Do not go anywhere. Subscribe to Sweet Justice if you have not already, because what Callie Reyes said when she took the stand is the moment this entire trial turned. Callie Reyes took the witness stand on the 4th day of trial. She was composed in the way that people are composed when composure is costing them something, not cold, but careful. She was dressed simply. She did not look at the Holloway family when she entered. She sat down, adjusted the microphone, and looked at Susan Park. Susan asked her to describe the moment she first understood who Raymond Holloway was. Callie said she had received a letter from Dennis Hale's agency addressed to her personally, asking if she would be willing to speak with someone who believed he was her biological father. She said her first reaction was not excitement. It was suspicion. She had grown up without a father and had long since made her peace with that absence. She was not looking for anyone. She had not responded to the letter for 3 weeks. She said her mother, Elena, had still been alive at that point. She died 8 months before Raymond of cancer, and that she had gone to Elena with the letter and asked her directly whether she knew anything about it. Elena had looked at the letter for a long time. Then she had told Callie everything: the conference in Chicago, the 8 months, the pregnancy, the decision to raise Callie alone, and the name she had never spoken, Raymond Holloway. Callie said she had gone home and typed that name into a search engine. The results had come back in under a second. She had stared at her screen for a very long time. She had called Dennis Hale's number the following morning. The meetings with Raymond, she said, had not been easy. They had not been the warm, cinematic reunion that people might imagine. They had been two strangers sitting across from each other, both aware of the weight of 30 years of absence, neither of them entirely sure what to say. Raymond had apologized, repeatedly and genuinely. He had not asked her to forgive him. He had said only that he wanted her to know that he had thought about her every single day, that he was sorry for the cowardice of his silence, and that he wanted to spend whatever time he had left making sure she knew she was not forgotten. Callie said she had not come to New York for money. She had come because her mother was dying and she was grieving, and a man she had never known was offering her something she had not realized she needed. The answer to a question she had carried her whole life. She said she had not known the contents of the will until after Raymond died. She said that if she had known, she would have asked him to change it. Susan asked why. Callie said, "Because I didn't want his money. I just wanted to know where I came from." The courtroom was completely still. Franklin Bose's cross-examination was thorough and professional and did not land a single significant blow. He could not shake her account of the first contact. He could not produce any evidence that she had initiated the relationship or manipulated Raymond's decisions. He could not explain away the DNA results or the capacity assessment or the documentation Susan Park had assembled over 14 months. He asked whether she intended to keep the inheritance if the court upheld the will. Callie said she had not decided. She said that was not what she had been thinking about. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They asked for the DNA confirmation to be sent back with them. They asked for Raymond's letter to Callie, a handwritten letter he had left with Susan Park, to be delivered to Callie after his death, in which he described his reasons for the will in his own words, to be read aloud again in the deliberation room. The verdict came on a Wednesday afternoon. The will was valid. Callie Reyes was the lawful heir to Raymond Holloway's estate. Margaret Holloway left the courthouse without speaking to the press. Daniel issued a statement saying the family would consider an appeal. The appeal was filed 6 weeks later and dismissed within the month. The evidence, the court found, was overwhelming and unambiguous. Callie Reyes gave a single interview 3 months after the verdict to a small Phoenix newspaper. She said she had donated a significant portion of the estate to her mother's memory, funding a scholarship for first-generation college students at the university Elena had always wanted to attend but never could. She said she was still a school librarian. She said she went to work every morning and came home every evening and tried not to think too much about any of it. She was asked whether she felt she had won. She said, "I found out who my father was. He found out he had a daughter. We had 8 months. I don't know if that's winning, but it's something." Raymond Holloway had spent 30 years carrying a secret that cost him nothing in the world's eyes and everything in his own. In the end, he had found the courage to correct it. Not perfectly, not without pain, not without a courtroom full of people fighting over what he left behind. But he had found it. That is what sweet justice looks like sometimes. Not a villain in handcuffs. Just a man who ran out of time to keep lying to himself, and a daughter who deserved to know the truth. Subscribe to Sweet Justice if this story moved you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. We will be back with another case very soon. We will see you then.